would be something you might want to do.
And Miles, just back to the computers, we watched the two lines come out of Boston, head directly south. It appeared to me, if I could see the small print correctly, the American Airlines flight was the first one we tracked. The second one out of Boston, United Airlines, went further south before banking back around over the skies of New Jersey into New York. I'm sorry, Miles, got to cut you off quickly here. Hopefully we'll come back to this in a moment. But in the meantime, to New York, Aaron Brown with more information. Aaron?
Bill, thanks. That is that's just an extraordinary piece of information, a lot of it, but just highlight again that the men on board that flight, at least according to one of the passengers, took a vote and decided to try and overpower the hijackers on board. Whether they did that, whether that contributed to the crash, we don't know now. We may never know. But that's what an extraordinary moments those must have been. As we look behind us, a day and a half now since those planes crashed into the World Trade Center, you can still see the thick smoke as water continues to be poured on what was building number 7. You cannot see it. At various times we've been able to see the building. You can't see it now. This is smoke, and it is debris, it is ash, it is asbestos. It is most unpleasant and unsafe. And the truth of it is, every time we're off camera, we put these little masks on our face to protect ourselves. You've seen this sort of thing before, and we've been up here for several hours, and we are constantly being urged to put them on, and we do a little bit. Why, if you can, so they can see. Richard, come on in. Richard Roth has been down on the streets most of the day, which he went up here with us, about 20-some stories up. Give me a sense of what it's like down there. I mean, you can see, if you just look down, as we can, that the streets are still just coated with ash.
You see some people with it on them, but mostly on the cars and the vehicles, but it's like you're walking around in a hospital emergency room. I really was surprised how many people are wearing the mask. I guess one should expect this, but you see people who are just sitting, tired, people exhausted, people. Very few stores are open, very few supplies really available. And this smoke has really been of 3 colors. We had white overnight and in the early morning hours. Then it was sort of tinged with yellow, then dark. And you're really struck also as the smoke moved over our head and headed up New York's fashionable east side. Yeah. You can hear the rumble. The only noise you hear other than that lonely siren of a wailing is you hear the equipment, the excavation gear going through the building from this distance.
Anyway, the wind, thank you. The wind, again, has appeared to shift a little bit, and I will selfishly say thankfully. It had been coming from the south towards us. It now seems to be drifting a bit towards the east, a bit more towards the east, and it's a little less strong than it was. An important piece of information here to pass along. Perhaps 90 minutes ago, we were hearing both from the mayor and from Moneyline anchor Lou Dobbs that it was the hope that the New York Stock Exchange would open sometime tomorrow. A lot of problems in getting the stock exchange open, but they hope they could do that. We now have word from officials of the New York Stock Exchange, and while I'm talking, let me ask that guys back in the Bureau in New York check to see if this includes the Amex and the NASDAQ as well. Will not open until Friday at the earliest, not until Friday at the earliest for the New York Stock Exchange, and then they added Monday at the latest. So it's very possible that virtually the entire week of trading on the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ and the Amex, I'm now told, will all stay closed tomorrow. They will not open at the earliest until Friday and may not open again until Monday, and how they react when they do reopen is one of those stories for another day. This is all complicated stuff. It is very complicated in Washington because this is not simply a criminal investigation. It is not simply an international and diplomatic situation. It is also, for the president, and is early in his term, a political situation, a political problem that has to be addressed. We use the word political in the best sense of the term. Our senior analyst, Jeff Greenfield, joins us for a few moments. Jeff, anything in particular about this situation, this president, this early in the term, that makes it particularly difficult?
Yes, it is unlike anything any president has ever gone through. We've had presidents take us to war in the past.
George Bush, the latest one, Franklin Roosevelt, but they took us to war against a specific identifiable enemy. We knew where the terrain was. We knew it had to be done. We've had presidents console us in a loss before, President Clinton, President Reagan with the Challenger. But those losses were nothing like the loss we are suffering now, and they were no kind of losses that subjected us to a sense of vulnerability. And moreover, you have a president who remembers that his father successfully prosecuted the Gulf War, got 90% approval ratings, but the recession that Gulf War helped cause because of fuel prices and consumer confidence helped undermine them. You put those things together, and here you have a president in the first year of his term facing an unprecedented challenge.
Just stay with me on this for a second, because at first blush, what I would see is a president who will have, by and large, an enormous percentage of the country behind him. Whatever he and the government decides to do, why is that problematic?
It's not problematic. Presidents always get support in the first phase of responding to a crisis. Part of the problem is when a crisis isn't resolved relatively quickly, this is not the most patient country in the world, that support gets undermined. Look what happened to Jimmy Carter with the Iran hostages. Look what happened to President Truman and the Democrats when the Korean War dragged on 2.5 years. This country does not deal with sustained long-term problems all that well.
But if you look at the Carter example, the problem there, it would seem to me, here is that he seemed, to a great many Americans at least, to be impotent to do anything. If this president responds in some way, and whether it is totally effective or not, but responds, appears to be doing something, doesn't that mitigate any downside there?
That is entirely possible. All I am pointing out here is that when we all tend to recognize the fact that the country rallies behind a president in a crisis, and Lord knows this is a crisis as big as any we have ever faced. That is not an overstatement. My point is only if you look at history, the challenges a president will face is that if that initial response is not followed by a pretty clear success, that support can be problematic. And we've all been pointing out, you and your colleagues have all been pointing out how difficult it is, unlike the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait or the North Korean invasion of the South, to identify exactly where to strike and how to do it. And my only point is to keep in mind, even at this early phase, simply to point out the difficulty that George W. Bush faces in dealing with a crisis this significant, this horrendous, and look at history, and it teaches you that a president cannot rely long-term on the unified support of Americans if he does not produce success.
And just to button it up, Jeff, even in this sort of situation, it's hard to know what success is.
Very good point.
It's just difficult to know.
Exactly.
Jeff, thanks. Senior analyst Jeff Greenfield with us now. Back to Atlanta, Bill Hemmer.
Aaron, thank you. Listening to Norm Mineta, the Secretary of Transportation, he has said up to this point, and I want to paraphrase his words, the airports in America have been reopened on a limited basis. The effort is to get passengers to continue their flights in order to get them to their original destination. There is strict security measures that will be implemented, and for the airlines involved, there's going to be a severe effort involved here to try and reposition the aircraft that have been mumbled and jumbled throughout America throughout the day yesterday, and they will continue to assess the threats on an ongoing basis. Norm Mineta now speaking in Washington.
Passengers will be allowed to proceed past airport screeners to catch their flights, and all vehicles near airport terminals will be monitored more closely. I know that all Americans want us to move as quickly and prudently as possible to return our national airspace system to normal, and we will, as soon as we can do so safely. In addition, I have the following announcements to make concerning other major transportation modes and venues. Major railroads are reporting normal operations and minimum delays. Amtrak is operating on a normal schedule and has returned normal operations in the Northeast Corridor. Many bridges connecting Manhattan and New York City remain closed, open only one way, or with limited access. New York City Transit is 95% operational, with the exception of the traffic around the World Trade Center site. Washington, D.C.'s Metro Rail system is operating on a regular schedule. Greyhound bus service has returned to normal operations. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, in terms of their terminal operations, remains closed. Our biggest concern is for the victims of yesterday's terrorist attacks. I would also like to commend our Department of Transportation employees who have shown an outpouring of support. Hundreds of our employees have asked what they can do in the wake of this catastrophe, whether donating blood or supporting rescue efforts. The United States Department of Transportation has been coordinating industry volunteer efforts to provide buses to transport emergency rescue personnel to Stony Creek, Pennsylvania. Again, let us leave here this afternoon with our thoughts and our prayers for the victims of yesterday's terrorist attacks.
Secretary, to take a couple of questions now. Jonathan Slent.
Both the General Accounting Office and the Office of Inspector General said that part of the problem with security airports are the low-paid, high-turnover screeners. What's being done to improve the screening of passengers before they board the planes?
Well, we started this process actually earlier this spring by coming out with a rulemaking to allow the Department of Transportation to have the increased powers or authority to require not only in terms of requirements, but the monitoring of the screening people at airports. And so as part of that process, we are looking at the whole issue of how to improve the ability to screen passengers as they come into the airport. As I said, one of the things that we're going to say is that no passengers are going to be allowed beyond that point. So they will only be screening passengers from now on. The second part of it is, how do we make sure the ability of those folks and what they're doing in terms of screening passengers is increased? That process we had started back in May of this year, I believe it was.
Mr. Secretary, can you give us some sense of how long you think it will take to get the system back up with the new security procedures?
Well, I can't give you a date or a time as to when we will be back in operation. We're trying to make that determination based on the safety and the security of the passengers and the airline operation, given the intelligence reports that we are getting. Now, as I had indicated earlier, I had hoped to start operations today at 12 noon, but because of the concerns of the FBI and the intelligence agencies about intelligence information they had, and we had a meeting early this morning, and then there was a meeting of the Security Council or a deputies meeting, and then we had, subsequent to that, a National Security Council meeting, which I was part of today. The determination was made to put off operations until we are sufficiently secure in our own information about when to resume operations. To the extent that we are moving or starting operations, that's why I said we're going to allow passengers who were diverted yesterday to be continuing on those flights and the repositioning of other aircraft. But beyond that, right now, we are not resuming normal operations.
It's the security concern that is keeping you from...
Pardon?
It's the security concern,
yes, sir.
Not the logistical problem.
Secretary's got to go now. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, everyone.
For those who have been stranded at American airports or have been stranded in cities they do not call home, this will come as a glimmer of hope in order to return to their loved ones and families that they have been left stranded and separated from. Norm Mineta issuing a limited basis return to flight, but we must at this point try and define limited. It had been told yesterday